I have always loved a great story, so much so that I have occasionally acted maybe just a little bit foolishly, trying to, kind of force my life to fit into a perfect story. For example, in college, I went to film school and I was working on a friend's student film, and even though it was New York and it was winter time and it was a night shoot, this one PA who I'd never met before, this cute guy, Simon, he didn't bring any gloves. So I happened to have a spare, and I gave him my spare pair, and then of course at the end of the night, he forgot to give them back. But he got my number from the director, and he called and asked if he could take me out to dinner and give me the gloves back. So I went, and Simon was an idiot. But I started dating him anyway, and continued to date him for far too long because I kept thinking it was such a cute way. The way we met, it would make a perfect story to share with our grandkids. Now, a few years later, I moved to Northern Virginia with my boyfriend, Jason, and we bought a house together, and I was loving the story that we were living of this young couple in love, newly moved in together, going to eventually get married and start living happily ever after together. But after about a year of living with Jason, I realized that he was living a slightly different story. He was in the story of a young man burdened by a girlfriend who wanted him to do stuff with her instead of being able to do whatever the heck he wanted to do, which was mostly play World of Warcraft. So once I figured out that he and I were maybe not in the same story, I realized that I should probably go off and start a new story with someone else. But it was right around the time that I had that realization that Jason kidnapped me. It wasn't a weird, rapey kind of kidnap. It was more of a fun kidnap experience. We were supposed to go to a friend's house for dinner, but he just kept driving past my friend's house, driving west out to Middleburg, and he had rented us a room in an inn for the weekend, and he had packed clothes for the weekend, and he had taken care of getting a babysitter for the dogs, and he had filled the room at the inn with flowers and champagne, and most importantly, chocolate. And then he handed me a diamond ring. Yeah, great story, right? It was such a great engagement story that it carried me all the way through our engagement and our wedding, even though pretty much getting the ring and getting the girl was the only part Jason participated in. He kind of abandoned me to handle everything else. And we were doing everything ourselves. I mean, I was doing everything myself. But we got married, and then we went off on our honeymoon. Now, Jason and I did not agree on a lot of things, but the one thing we did agree on was our love of the Grand Canyon. So for our honeymoon, we decided we were gonna hike the canyon rim to rim, even though it was going to be in July. Yeah, that's another story. So, of course, I made all the arrangements, right? So we got married, we flew to Arizona, and then we drove up to the canyon. Now, I had gotten us permits for 6 nights in the canyon. If you don't know, you need permits to sleep there, partly so that they can gather fees, right? But also so that the rangers can keep track of you, right? So they know where you're going to be every night, because a lot of people die in the canyon every year. But I had gotten us permits for 6 nights, starting the night after we arrived in Arizona. I kind of thought we were gonna wanna take it easy that first night, but Jason figured we should get right to it. So we drove up to the canyon after we landed in Phoenix, and we could have stayed at a hotel, but we had just spent a lot of money on our wedding, and we could have slept in the car. I mean, we were young, but where's the fun in that, right? So we went for option number 3. We were gonna start our hike one night early, and we were gonna hide from the rangers. Now, most people who hike the canyon from the South Rim use the Bright Angel Trail. This is where all the photos get taken, right? And that is because this trail is super cushy. It's like 4 feet wide enough for a human and a donkey to be traveling at the same time. There's a water pipe that runs along it, so there's frequent water stops. There's bathrooms along the way. It is so nice. I do not know why so many people die there every year. But we figured, since that's where all the tourists would be, we would not go there. We would go to an old mining trail, way far away from where all the tourists go. We had a trail map of the canyon, so we drove miles and miles down this road, and we parked in the parking lot that only had like 4 spots, and ours was the only car there. And then we headed off down this old mining trail. The miners who built it did not have tourism in mind. There was no water pipe running along it. There were no bathrooms, and there were no campsites, right? There was a plateau we were going to set up camp that night. And it was not quite 4 feet wide. It was more like 2 feet wide on a good day. I had to walk, putting my feet as close together as possible to avoid falling to my death. There were several areas along the trail that I had to turn to the wall and just sort of boulder sideways because my hips just weren't gonna make it. But we made it to the plateau after about a 3-hour hike, and we did not see a ranger or another single soul. We set up our tent, we boiled some water, and we had that delicious dehydrated food everyone keeps talking about for dinner. And then we went to sleep, in peace, utterly alone on the first night of our honeymoon. In the morning, the sun graciously woke us up at 4:30 a.m., because if you didn't know, there is no shade when you're on the plateau in the middle of the canyon. And the first thing we noticed was at 4:30 a.m., it was a balmy 95 degrees. And the second thing we noticed was we had used up most of our water on the hike in. Now, I didn't think this was too much of a problem. It was 4:30. We could pack up quickly. We could make it to the top in about 5 hours. We had a few sips of water left. Despite the heat, we weren't going to die of dehydration. Jason disagreed with me. He thought it would be smarter to continue further down the trail and look for water. Now, he wasn't an idiot. There was a water stop marked on the trail map about a mile further along. But considering I don't think anyone had hiked down that trail in about 100 years, I was highly skeptical of the idea of the water fountain actually working if we went for it. So I said, no, I'm not going down there, let's leave. And Jason did what he always did. He did what he wanted to do. He took our empty water sacks and he headed down the trail. Now this was the first day of our life together as a married couple, so I just tried to make the best of it. I let him go, and I could see him walking away down the switchback. And I thought, you know what, it's my honeymoon. I'm gonna enjoy it. I'm gonna get comfortable. I sat down on a rock. I leaned my back against a rock, and I started thinking happy thoughts. I thought about the wedding and how beautiful it was. I thought about my friends and my family and my dogs, and those happy thoughts kept my brain occupied for a good 5 minutes. And then my brain started to go in a different direction. I started thinking maybe we're not in the story of a young couple in love on a honeymoon adventure. Maybe we're in the story of a young couple in love on their honeymoon who did something very, very bad and did not tell anybody where they would be. And you know, when you do something bad, you were in a horror movie. So then I started thinking, okay, one or both of us is going to be dead. Because that would be so perfect, right? That would make the perfect story. And once I went there, I couldn't take it back. It was out there. So I started playing in my head all of these scenarios, thinking, you know what, Jason, he's probably dead already. I should probably go look for him because he's probably in a ditch somewhere, or maybe a rock has fallen on his arm and he's busily sawing it off, because it's been like an hour at this point. And then I thought, no, you know what, if I try to go rescue him, I'm gonna fall to my death, and then he's gonna realize I'm dead, and then he's gonna kill himself, because it's gonna be like Romeo and Juliet. And then I figure, okay, so no, I will go and get help from the rangers. But remember, he's taken what little water we had, so I have nothing to take with me. So then I'm just kind of stuck on this plateau thinking, should I go that way to my death or that way to my death? And then, I'm standing there thinking, every minute that passes brings me closer and closer to death by dehydration, and the sun is getting hotter and it's 150 degrees at this point, and so I did the only practical thing. I sat down and started sobbing, wasting all that valuable water. And that is the point at which Jason returned and kicked my boot. And I looked up and I was so happy to see him. I jumped up and I wrapped my arms around him and I said, "Oh, thank God you're alive." And he just kind of peeled my hands off of him and pushed me away and said, "I just went to get water." I was happy he was alive, and we were on our honeymoon, and so I kind of let the tone go. And I took my water and he took his, and we hoisted our backpacks and we hiked out in complete silence. But we made it. We survived the adventure, and we survived the next 6 nights in the canyon, and it was a grand adventure. And our marriage survived the next 1.5 years. And then we started living a different story. It was the story of 2 young people, no longer in love, going through a very long, boring, and painful divorce. The divorce got so painful and so vicious that at one point or another, I found myself fantasizing that maybe I was in a different story, a better story, a more perfect story, a story where 2 young people in love went on a honeymoon adventure together, and only one of them came back alive. Thank you.